Michael Shellenberger is founder of Public News. He joins me now. Michael, I want to start with Spencer Pratt. He's on fire right now, and that's largely because of his social media campaign, which is Chef's Kiss. But there's something beyond just the social media videos that grab your attention. He's actually tapping into something in Los Angeles. I think he's got a real shot, because I'm seeing people that are not MAGA Republicans that are getting behind Spencer Pratt, that are endorsing Spencer Pratt because they want common sense in LA. They don't want to pay some of the highest taxes and highest cost of living in the country to be walking in human crap, as he so eloquently put it. Do you think Spencer has a real chance here, and will this be a major wake-up call to Los Angeles Democrats if he pulls it off?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, look at what he's doing creatively. I mean, he has volunteers creating AI-based videos. He's speaking really bluntly about the addiction problem for the first time. He's saying that LA policies, progressive policies, are killing addicts. They're killing people with mental illness. It's not just an impact on the residents, it's also an impact on the most vulnerable people, who are, of course, the people that progressives in Los Angeles say they care the most about. So I think it's, look, one of the most exciting, disruptive political campaigns I've seen in my entire life. I think a lot of other people feel that way.
One of the biggest problems in Los Angeles is, of course, the homeless encampments that take over just about everything. He's one of the only people, let alone candidates, that I've heard actually address the problem and say more housing is not going to solve the problem. Throwing more billions at the problem is not going to solve the problem. And in that lengthy video, he addressed some of these nonprofits that are really acting like a grift. Do you think that he could dismantle this whole nonprofit industrial complex in Los Angeles, actually get these people the treatment that they need, and get rid of the homeless encampments that's been really devastating all of California for the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the core issue, is that I think it's not just that they're allowing drug dealers to sell deadly drugs to vulnerable people. It's actually the city and the state are subsidizing the equipment, the pipes, the needles, the places to stay, the overdose to Narcan people to get over their overdoses, and then they put them right back on the street. And I think for a long time there's been denial about the essential nature of the problem being addiction rather than just being high rents. He's finally been able to deliver that message in a way that a lot of us have attempted to over the years, but he's done so in a way that's just obviously only a reality TV star could really get away with.
Yeah, well, he does it perfectly, but he's speaking common sense. I mean, if you're in Los Angeles and you talk to people, whether they're Democrat, conservative, doesn't matter, they are fed up with the homeless crisis. They are fed up with having these encampments by their children's schools and their parks, something he expertly addresses. It's common sense, but he makes it look like a new idea. You know, when we're talking about Spencer Pratt and his impact on the race, the only thing they've really been able to say is that he doesn't actually live in the trailer and that he's a MAGA Republican, which he shrugged off. Do you think the endorsement from President Trump is going to make a difference one way or another in this race?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, this is a big test here, I think, is to see the extent to which the voters are really going to vote with their brains and their hearts, or whether they're going to just fall in line. I think it's notable that two of the best ads that were apparently created by volunteers, not by his campaign, one of them had women in a Pilates studio, another one had guys in a backyard barbecue, and they were all sort of embarrassed to admit they were scared that they would be canceled by their friends for admitting that they were voting for Spencer Pratt for mayor. I think that really gets at the dynamic here, and the power is that he could set off a preference cascade where essentially people look around and they go, wow, these other people are also voting for Spencer Pratt. You know, they're saying, you know, one of the ads, they say, you know, I'm not MAGA, but our city's, you know, really gone downhill, using more profane language than that. I think that's exactly the kind of message that people in Los Angeles need. This isn't actually about the United States. It's not about Trump. It's not about partisan politics. It's about common sense for dealing with the essential problem in Los Angeles, which is untreated addiction and mental illness. And the fact that the city government and the state are actively promoting the enablement of addiction and therefore all these overdoses and deaths that they get, because they refuse to stage an intervention, like another famous reality show. They refuse to stage the intervention that addicts need in order to get into rehabilitation and recovery.
I feel bad for the homeless people. I feel bad for the addicts. I also feel bad for the decent folks that just have to live and work in the Los Angeles area, because they shouldn't have to put up with this. I'm really pulling for Spencer Pratt. Let's see what he can do. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube. And catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.